Sokka's relationship with Suki evolves from being antagonistic to being romantic by the end of the first episode in which we meet these characters, that being episode 104, The Warriors of Kyoshi. But the evolution of their relationship does not stop there. Co-creators of Avatar, Brian Konietzko and Michael Dante DiMartino, originally only planned for Suki to appear in one episode, but because the character became so popular among fans, she was brought back in Season 2, before eventually joining Sokka and the rest of Team Avatar in Season 3. Between her first appearance in Avatar: The Last Airbender and when she reunites with Sokka in episode 212, The Serpent's Pass, Sokka falls in love with the beautiful Water Tribe princess Yue. Despite his best efforts, he loses her. She has to save the world, and this weighs on him. Suki knows something is wrong when they meet up in episode 212, but she still is as in love with him as she is back in Season 1. So why does she fall in love with him? And, as importantly, why does she stay in love with him? Let's investigate. I talked in one of my previous videos about why Sokka loves Suki, and in that video I mentioned Suki's appreciation for Sokka's desire to make himself into a better person. Sure, he begins the series as a conceited sexist who embarrasses his sister and believes he is a far more competent warrior than he actually is, but he proves himself willing to grow and to change. He proves himself willing to become a better person, even when it is hard. I would like to expand on that. When they first meet, she believes he has an inflated opinion of himself, and this is not entirely untrue, but what's more accurate, perhaps, is to say that he likes to convince people he has an inflated opinion of himself. He tries to project a confident, even arrogant swagger that he does not completely believe in because he wants others to believe in it. He does not want them to see the vulnerability and insecurity that lie beneath the facade. He does not want others to see his fear of inadequacy. This insight adds resonance to an otherwise light and comedic scene in episode 209, Bitter Work. In this episode, Sokka falls into a fissure while attempting to chase a baby saber-toothed moose lion cub, and the more he struggles, the more he makes his own situation worse. He promises to the powers that be that if they save him, he will give up meat and sarcasm, even though those are the two main components of his identity. I laugh whenever I see this scene, and it is indeed very funny, but it also reveals something quite haunting about his psyche. Unlike Katara, he has a difficult time facing the trauma of his mother's death directly, especially considering that trauma was compounded by his father leaving them both and going out to war to fight against the Fire Nation. Instead, he relies on sarcasm to stop himself from having to deal honestly with his sorrows, and he relies on meat, a traditional signifier of macho masculinity. Yes, meat is not inevitably male-coded, and especially in the Southern Water Tribe, it is an essential source of food, for they rely on hunting and fishing, but it is not hard to draw a line between Sokka's desire to appear as stereotypically masculine as possible, and how he constructs a significant portion of his identity around his rapid consumption of meat. As he spends time with Suki, she sees through his facade to the lonely, dorky, broken person he really is. He wants to be the man his father is, especially after his father leaves, but instead, he is a joke. Katara is the one who had to take care of them both when they were growing up. She says as much in the opening episode of the show, and he admits this to Toph in episode 307, The Runaway. The relations between fathers and sons is incredibly important to both Avatar: The Last Airbender and its sequel series, The Legend of Korra. Think of Zuko's fundamentalist desire to please the man who burned his face. Or think of how Tenzin believes he has to be the man his father was in order to carry on his father's legacy, and how that results in him becoming a psychological wreck. Both of these characters let go of their desires to be like their fathers, although in Zuko's case it is obviously more dramatic. Sokka is different. He does not completely abandon his desire to be like his father, but he does, over the course of the show, escape the narrow ideas he initially has of what a warrior is. He acknowledges his faults, and Suki appreciates this about him. While we might say he learns his lesson about not being a macho sexist git, quite early into episode 104, this is nonetheless telling. It demonstrates how adaptable he is. It demonstrates that he is willing to change. Suki kisses him at the end of episode 104 not because he's the ultra macho badass he pretends to be, but because he is the opposite of that person. He's a brave but awkward child of war who's trying desperately to become strong enough to reassemble the pieces of his war-torn and broken life into something resembling a whole and complete existence. While Sokka does not change as much as Zuko or even Katara throughout the course of Avatar: The Last Airbender, he does have a significant character journey, and it relies on repetition. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Repetition is usually used in a derogatory manner, but it does not have to be. It's a valuable artistic tool when used intelligently, and not in the service of lazy writing. There is nothing innately wrong with character development occurring in a pattern, so long as the individual instances of that development are captivating. For Sokka, the pattern is fairly simple. His cocky preconceptions about himself and the world cause real harm, so he has to try and correct his mistakes. He abandons these faulty preconceptions. He becomes closer and closer to the person Suki thinks of him as. Someone who is mature and thoughtful enough to look at himself with no illusions. It happens in episode 110, when his belief that there is nothing more important than defeating the Fire Nation, wherever they are, however you can, is thrown into question by the appearance of the fundamentalist Jet. Seeing in Jet the person he has hitherto wanted to be, the suave and skilled warrior who is willing to go to any lengths to defeat the Fire Nation, he turns away from that person, not just out of jealousy, but out of a concerted desire to become a better person. It happens after Azula foils his plan to defeat the Fire Nation on the Day of Black Sun. He blames himself for this defeat, and though, yes, there is no way he could have possibly known Azula would learn his plan, and though, yes, the funk this defeat inflicts upon him is not healthy, to the extent that it's Zuko who has to wake him out of that funk and convince him to keep trying, to keep scheming, to keep trying to come up with things, even if a lot of his plans fail. Despite all this, his willingness to self-reflect is still a positive. It marks him apart from early Zuko, who was similarly bullheaded, but who was unwilling to examine the extent to which he had misconceived the world, at least until Season 2, when the last traces of his ego are swept away. Perhaps most importantly for the relationship between Sokka and Suki, it happens in episode 212, The Serpent's Pass, where he is overprotective of her, debilitatingly so, because of how his last relationship, the one with Yue, ended. This is an example of him trying to correct course and learn from his past mistakes, but he overcorrects, treating Suki as though she is not a competent warrior, even though she is very skilled and intelligent. There's this beautiful shot in that episode wherein Sokka wants to kiss Suki, but he can't because the moon is between them. They could have left it there and it would have been satisfying, but I'm glad they don't. Sokka finally admits he's lost someone who's meant a lot to him. It's hard for him to open up, but he does. It's hard for him to be vulnerable, but he is, in large part because of her help, and she loves him even more for that. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a beautiful masterpiece that y'all should rewatch. Not just because of its depth, but because of its breadth. The show has a very large cast of characters, and yet they all feel like real people with real stories for the most part, instead of just vapid accessories for Aang's story about saving the world. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis of this great show. It will be coming soon. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.